I got a $2,400 fine, addressed to my dead father. The house? Empty for years. No one lived there. But the HOA, Karen said, if he's not alive to pay it, maybe you will. That was her first mistake. What she didn't know was, I had proof that could bury her. I opened my mailbox expecting junk and bills, but what I found stopped me cold. A bright red envelope stamped "Final Notice" from the Lake Willow Estates HOA. Inside was a demand for $1,400 in late landscaping fees, supposedly accrued over the past 6 months. But here's the part that hit like a punch to the gut. The letter was addressed to my father who passed away in 2016. The house they were fining? Empty. Has been for years. After my mother died in 2018, I boarded it up, turned off the water and power, and handled every last bit of probate paperwork like a dutiful son. I own that property now. And yet here I was, holding a bill made out to a dead man for a home that hadn't seen a lawnmower or a light bulb in over a decade. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was a clerical mix-up, some automated mistake from a system nobody cared enough to update. So I called the HOA office, ready to politely clear things up. That's when I met Linda Holbrook. You know the type. Tight blonde helmet hair, too much perfume, and the kind of voice that drips with vinegar and superiority. She'd been HOA president for 11 years, and from the first word out of her mouth, I knew she was drunk on the power of it. I don't care if he's deceased, she said flatly. If there's grass on the lot, there's a fine on the ledger. No hesitation, no empathy, just a smirk I could practically hear through the phone. She went on to say that, legally, she could continue issuing fines to the last recorded owner until the property was brought back into community compliance. I told her the property wasn't even within HOA jurisdiction anymore, that it had been rezoned 20 years ago during a utility restructure. She laughed, said, "Once part of the community, always part of the community." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about grass. This was a shakedown. She wasn't operating with rules, she was operating with spite. And she didn't realize that while I might have been calm, I wasn't weak. She was counting on silence, on shame, on the hope that no one would challenge her or bother to dig deeper. But what she didn't count on was me. I started collecting everything: old deeds, zoning maps, certified letters from the city, even the original HOA charter from 1992 that explicitly outlined which properties fell under its control. My father's property excluded. I spoke with the county recorder, who confirmed it on paper and in writing. I even discovered that Linda had a habit of sending fines to other properties linked to deceased residents, hoping no one would contest them. And it worked. Families would find these scary-looking notices and pay up just to make them go away. But not me. I wasn't paying a dime. In fact, I was just getting started. And if you're watching this and believe in standing up for the truth, even when the system tries to intimidate you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on that bell so you never miss how these stories end. Because what I uncovered next took this from petty harassment to something far more sinister. You see, I found out Linda wasn't just mailing these notices on behalf of the HOA. She was pocketing fees, quietly, off the books. She'd created a shell account using a dormant HOA reserve fund that she managed directly. No oversight, no co-signers. I have the bank routing numbers, the forged signatures, the whistleblower emails from a former board member who resigned, in disgust. And just when I thought I had it all, the documents, the motive, the timeline, I received a plain manila envelope on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a photo, a grainy surveillance shot of me, standing outside the old house holding my phone. Scribbled in red ink across the bottom were 5 chilling words. "Back off. You've been warned." I don't scare easy, but I won't lie. That one shook me, because it meant she knew I was digging, and it meant she was watching. So now the question is, what happens when a man who's lost everything is pushed one? Step too far? Stay tuned. Because in part 2, she makes her biggest mistake yet. The week after that first bogus fine, things escalated fast. like Linda Holbrook had taken my call as a personal challenge. 2 more violations arrived in my mailbox, each more absurd than the last. One claimed there were weeds visible from the road, even though the grass was brittle, yellow, and barely 3 inches high. The other slapped a fine on me for an unauthorized exterior paint color, which made absolutely no sense. The house hadn't been touched with a brush in 10 years. The paint was peeling, sure, but it was the same faded beige it had been since the mid-2000s. That's when it became clear this wasn't about maintenance or appearances. This was personal. Then came the final insult. A violation notice sent to my late uncle, a man who never lived in that house a single day of his life. His name had only appeared briefly during estate paperwork years ago, yet somehow Linda found it and used it to tack on more fees. That's when the sick realization hit me. This woman was scouring public death records, combing through obituaries, hunting down anyone remotely tied to old properties, just so she could slap on imaginary charges. She was padding the HOA's books with fines for the dead, threatening their families, and counting on silence to keep the scam rolling. It wasn't just unethical, it was vile. I couldn't take it anymore. I drove down to the HOA office in person, heart pounding, but my face calm as ice. The building was just a single-story prefab, with a plastic eagle nailed to the wall, and the smell of old coffee in the air. Linda was there, sitting behind a faux oak desk, smug as ever in her little throne of power. I walked in and asked to see the full breakdown of fines on my father's property, every charge, every date, every justification. She didn't even pretend to be cooperative. "That's private HOA business," she said, waving a manicured hand like I was some mosquito buzzing too close to her glass of Chardonnay. I calmly reminded her that the house hadn't legally belonged to the HOA since 1998. The jurisdiction was crystal clear in the city records, and you know what she said? She leaned forward, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Once part of the community, always part of the community." That's when I saw it. The smile. Not a friendly one. A smirk, the kind of smile people wear when they think they've already won. She thought I'd walk away like everyone else, but I'm not everyone else. I don't scream and I don't slam fists on desks. I get quiet. I get methodical, because when a man's family is disrespected, especially the dead, something ancient, inside you wakes up. You don't let it go. You bury it deep and start building your response one fact at a time. She had no idea I'd already started the paper trail. I already had photos, timestamps, city documents, and archived HOA boundaries, showing her little empire didn't stretch far enough to touch my father's land. But now I was going further. I was going to expose this entire rotten system. And if you're still watching this, if you've ever been pushed around by someone in a fake position of power who thinks you're too old, too quiet, or too polite to fight back, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the bell to all. Because the next part of this story, it's going to light a fire under anyone who's ever been ignored, insulted, or underestimated. And just when I thought Linda couldn't stoop any lower, I got a call from a woman named Cheryl in a nearby neighborhood who whispered over the phone like she was afraid someone was listening. She said, "You don't know me, but I saw the notices on your property. Linda's been doing this to widows in our block too. We tried to stop her. Someone's husband ended up in the hospital over the stress." And then she said something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "We found out Linda's not even legally president anymore. Her re-election wasn't certified by the board. She's been forging signatures for 2 years. That was it. The smirk, the lies, the forged authority. It was all coming down. But before I could make my next move, a certified letter arrived. Not from Linda this time, but from the County Code Enforcement Office. It claimed I was being investigated for harboring hazardous waste on residential land. And attached to the file was a photograph, a freshly taken one, of a sealed oil drum in the backyard, a drum I'd never seen before. Which meant only one thing. Someone had planted it. She wasn't just sending letters anymore. She was willing to fake. A crime to shut me up, and if you think this is where it ends, you haven't seen anything yet. I spent the entire weekend at my dining room table, surrounded by dusty binders, zoning maps, and photocopied bylaws so old they still referenced fax machines and Blockbuster drop boxes. But every minute was worth it, because buried in the middle of a county utilities resolution from 1998, I found it. Proof. A signed, notarized annexation document showing that my father's property had been legally removed from the Lake Willow Estate's HOA boundaries over a quarter-century ago after a dispute over infrastructure maintenance. In black and white, plain as day. Linda Holbrook and her little empire? They had zero legal authority over the property, no jurisdiction, no enforcement rights, no power to levy a single fine. Every notice she'd sent, every fee she tacked on, every accusation she spewed, it was all hot air and bad perfume. But I wasn't done, because the deeper I dug, the uglier it got. While flipping through old violation records posted on the HOA community bulletin board, yes, she'd been arrogant enough to publicly post names and addresses, I started noticing a pattern. Fines sent to people with surnames I remembered from local obituaries. I cross-referenced death records and public tax roll entries and nearly choked. Over 200 violation letters issued in the past 4 years were tied to deceased individuals, mostly elderly homeowners who had either passed away or moved into assisted care. Their family members were being sent threatening notices, and most had quietly paid up just to avoid hassle or shame. Linda wasn't just running an HOA, she was running a collection racket preying on grief and confusion. And then came the bombshell. Fining dead individuals without notifying legal heirs and using intimidating tactics to extract payment. That's not just immoral. It violates the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. In fact, the moment I explained the situation to a local consumer protection attorney, the guy nearly dropped his phone. "This isn't just civil," he said, voice suddenly sharp. "You're describing federal mail fraud, potential elder exploitation, financial abuse targeting survivors." I sent him everything, scanned copies of every letter, photos of posted violations, HOA charters, and side-by-side comparisons of the zoning maps. He called back the next morning and said, "We're building a case." And we weren't building it small. We submitted formal complaints to the State Attorney General's office and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We filed one with the Federal Trade Commission. I even drafted an anonymous tip to a local news reporter who had a history of covering HOA corruption. Linda had no idea, but she'd walked straight into a legal bear trap, and the steel jaws were already clamping shut. What she thought was a quiet harassment campaign was about to become a headline. And if you've ever been pushed around by a petty tyrant like her, someone who hides behind policy to disrespect your name, your family, and your dignity, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and smash that bell. To all, so you don't miss how this story ends. Because trust me, the reckoning is coming. The best part? It was all legal, all airtight, all traceable. And just when I thought justice was finally rolling forward, I received a phone call that twisted everything sideways. It was from a paralegal at the county courthouse who'd been helping me verify Linda's filings. She sounded rattled. She said, "You need to come down here and see something for yourself. It's about the property deed. Someone amended it last week." Amended? Without my knowledge. When I got there, she handed me a printed copy of a quitclaim deed, one supposedly transferring partial rights of the property to the Lake Willow Estates Homeowners Association. Backdated, with my father's signature. From 2022, 6 years after he died. My hands went cold. Someone had forged a dead man's signature. And they weren't done playing dirty. ChatGPT said it didn't take long before the heat caught up to her. Exactly 1 week after we filed our complaints, Linda Holbrook came stomping up my porch steps like she owned the whole block, her face blotchy, her voice cracking with rage, and a crumpled, certified letter in her shaking hand. "How dare you go after me for doing my job?" she snapped, nostrils flaring like she was about to explode. I didn't offer her a seat. I didn't invite her inside. I just stood there in the doorway, calm and solid, and held out a single sheet of paper. My certified zoning map from the county office clearly marked with the line where her HOA authority ended. A bold red highlight stopped exactly 12 feet before my property line. "You've had no jurisdiction here for 27 years, I said, steady as stone. Then I pulled out the second document, a cease and desist letter from my attorney, addressed directly to her, and copied to the state's Department of Consumer Affairs. Her hands trembled as she read it, and her mouth curled into a sneer. "You're going to pay dearly for this," she hissed, eyes full of venom. I smiled, slow and steady. "So will you." And that's when I noticed them, two men standing across the street in dark slacks, dress shirts, and sunglasses. No clipboards, no HOA badges. Just quiet authority radiating from every move. They weren't neighbors. They weren't board members. They were investigators from the state attorney general's office, silently documenting everything. Every notice Linda had posted, every doorstep she pounded on, every angry, misinformed confrontation. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd had enough. My complaint had set off a chain reaction. 3 other families had come forward, including a Vietnam veteran whose wife passed last year and whose estate had mysteriously been charged for missing mailbox fees. One woman discovered that her deceased mother had been fined for window shutters not painted HOA-approved beige. Another showed proof that Linda had entered her late uncle's home, taken photographs, and emailed the heirs with demands. And now the state was watching her. Watching everything. If you've ever had someone abuse their little slice of authority and think no one would call them on it, then you know exactly how it feels to watch them start to squirm. It's not about revenge. It's about justice. It's about telling the kind of people who push you, your family and your memory around that we see you. And we don't back down. If you're feeling that too, do me a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on that bell to all so you don't miss what comes next. Because this story, it's just getting good. As Linda marched off my porch still, muttering threats under her breath, one of the investigators turned and snapped a photo of her retreating back. A moment later, he made a call from his cell phone and nodded. Something was happening. Something big. And just when I thought her day couldn't get worse, my lawyer called. He said, "You're going to want to see this. One of our records. Requests just came through. We got the HOA's expense ledger, and you won't believe where the money's been going." What we found would blow the case wide open and leave Linda wishing she'd never pushed a single envelope through a single mailbox. By the time spring rolled in, the world Linda Holbrook thought she ruled had crumbled beneath her feet. The state had completed its investigation, and the verdict was clear: misconduct, mail fraud, harassment of grieving families, and a pattern of targeting estates with no living representative to fight back. She was stripped of her HOA presidency, pending both civil and criminal charges, and her name, once whispered with fear on neighborhood streets, became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in Lake Willow Estates. The HOA itself wasn't spared either. They were hit with a $275,000 settlement, forced to liquidate community funds to pay restitution to 60 families, each of whom had been fined, shamed, or pressured based on ghostly charges tied to people no longer alive to defend themselves. It wasn't just money. The board had to publish a public letter of apology, mailed out and posted on their community website, admitting the truth in cold ink. "We regret the distress caused by our actions. This property was never within our jurisdiction, and all fines have been rescinded." When I opened the one sent to my father's estate, I stared at the line that cleared our family's name. Our home, our dignity, all restored. But you know me by now. I didn't stop there. I wanted to make sure this never happened again, not to my family, not to anyone else. So I attended the next HOA election. I nominated Mr. Alvarez, a Marine veteran who had lost his wife and been fined for improper foliage height 2 months after burying her. A quiet man, the kind the HOA thought wouldn't fight back. We rallied. We passed flyers. We talked to neighbors who were sick of living under fear of notices taped to their doors. Mr. Alvarez won by a landslide. And his very first motion as president? A ban on all estate-related fines without confirmed living ownership, legal jurisdiction, and notarized proof of community inclusion. That vote passed unanimously, and the room erupted into applause. Not because we hated rules, but because we'd won back our voice, our right to peace, and our power to stand tall, even in grief. For the first time in years, Lake Willow Estates didn't feel like a prison, it felt like a neighborhood. And Linda? Well, her name disappeared from the HOA rolls. Her face vanished from community newsletters. Last I heard, she was selling her house and trying to fight the charges stacked against her. It's poetic, really. She spent years trying to bully the dead, padding her ego with threats and lies, using postage and clipboards as weapons. And, in the end, she buried her own authority in a grave of her own making. If you've ever been underestimated, harassed by someone drunk on power, or watched a bully try to hide behind a badge, then you know exactly how satisfying it is when the truth finally burns through the lies. If that sounds like justice to you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and tap that bell to all so you don't miss the next story. Because these HOA bullies aren't done yet, and I've got more receipts coming. But just as I was ready to close this chapter, a neighbor slid a folder under my door, photocopies of emails, dated back years, showing that Linda had been funneling fine money into a private community beautification fund that wasn't disclosed on any ledger. The fund was real, the expenses, not so much. And suddenly, what started as a fine to a dead man looked a whole lot like embezzlement. And the next chapter of this war is about to blow wide open. You mess with a man's family, especially his, dead, and expect him to stay quiet. If you enjoyed watching a calm man dismantle a corrupt HOA with ironclad facts and strategy, hit that like button, subscribe for more epic revenge stories, and drop a comment below if you've ever dealt with a Karen on a power trip.